Welcome. So this will be the Maya 4 lecture. Today is a bit of odds and ends, folks. It is kind of just me throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and seeing what will stick in your brain. Today we will not have an assignment. We'll have our first project. So we'll talk more about that once we get to the end. But for today, we're going to go over some things. This is just some new solids that we haven't talked about. You may want to try out some new primitives. And then these are some more methodology type stuff, ways to work in Maya. Not necessarily new tools, but new ways of affecting how your tools will be operating in Maya. So let's start off with the simple platonic solids. So platonic solid is this icon right here. If you click it, it's going to make a D20. It's going to make a icosahedron. So, but if you click on this, much like other primitives, there are all those kind of settings that primitives normally have. It'll let you toggle what type of primitive it is. And there are other kinds of platonic solids that are in here. Essentially a D8, essentially a D12, essentially a D4, essentially a D6. It's just a cube. I don't know why this is in here, but whatever. So if you right click on this icon though, you'll see a couple other options. You'll see, let me delete this. You'll see like a gear. And this gear has settings that you can control how many sides are on it. You can control this internal radius. You can control this radius. You can control this gear spacing. You can control the gear offset. Right? So lots of crazy stuff you can affect. There's also a helix. The helix. You can increase how widespread the coils are. You can increase the number of coils. You can increase the radius of the coils. Again, how to edit these channels here, you're going to select the word. You can either type the value, right? You can also scroll here. You can scroll over this box and it will do that too. But I like to select the word, middle mouse button out here, middle mouse button and hold, and that will allow you to scroll the values in that channel. So now these are triangular helix pieces. And then I can add more coils or less coils, decrease the height of this, whatever. One thing that I showed off last period, which I'll show now, is you can duplicate this. And then if you go under, again, in object mode, scale X to -1, you'll get something like this. So it'll sort of flip it. Or you can, I think if you just do scale -1 on the Z, it'll do a similar thing just the other way. And then you can also invert it vertically too. It'll do like that. So check it out. Today's assignment, or the project, once we get to it, you'll see is just about lots of trying things out, getting new stuff. So that's our platonic solids, some neat new primitives. You may use them, you may not use them. That's that. So let's move on to soft select. So as I said, a lot of today is going to be about ways that we can change how our tools do what they already do. Tools that we've already worked with, how can we change the way that they affect things? So soft select will turn on when you press the B key. So let me get a cylinder, or actually let me get a sphere. And if I press B in object mode, you'll see I get the little notification, soft select mode is on, but nothing changes. If I'm in a component mode, so I'm in vertex mode right now, you'll see that as I hover over this object, there's like this yellow into a red glow. Now what soft select is doing is it's telling you what its fall off radius is, which is essentially what is the area of effect for what you're trying to do. So I have selected this single vertice right here, right? When I press B to bring soft select back, you can see this yellow area fading to orange, fading to red, and there it doesn't actually get all the way to black because it's a small sphere. But that is showing me the radius of my effect. So again, I only have one vertex actually selected, but if I move this, you'll see how it distorts the rest of the sphere's vertices based on their distance away from the vertice I have selected, radiating the effect out. So back here, nothing is happening to these vertices from moving this. How do you change the radius of this effect? So if B turns it on and on, B as in brush, if you hold B and hold left click, that will allow you to change the fall off radius of this effect. And it will only affect the single object that you are on. So that's soft select. You can do something like that. You can scale things. So if you use shift and caret, which we talked about on Tuesday's notes, growing my selection. Now I have all of those verts selected and I'm scaling them together. And then I'm scaling the area around it as well. I can condense that more. Now I have this lumpy pear shape. Kind of looks like a golf club actually. So that is soft select. So again, if your components are showing up yellow and stuff, B turns that on and off. This is how you should be operating Maya most of the time, right? No soft select on. Okay, today, like I said, is going to be me throwing a lot of new random stuff at you. So any burning questions on the two things we've discussed so far? What do you got?
Wait, yeah, do it or something else.
Oh, let me come look.
I was gonna turn on the Zoom or something.
Yeah, that's a soft select, right? Good. Okay, so folks, the next thing is talking about some real fundamentals of how Maya operates. So we're all familiar with our good friend at this point, the manipulator, right? The manipulator is where our effects happen from. You grab a handle on the manipulator, it does an effect. By default, the manipulator will be at the center of your object's volume, okay? But the place where the manipulator is located is called the pivot point. So when you rotate, that's the point around which your object will pivot. Imagine that. Now, what if spinning around the center of your object is not super useful and you want to spin around something else? So what if I had a little cone here and I have a sphere over here and I want to spin them around, make like a little solarium or what have you? Well, I could just eyeball it and just place them around this, or I can hold D as in David, V as in Victor, drag the center point here, drag my pivot point to the top of this cone, and then when I rotate, now it'll rotate around that point instead of the center of the volume. So let's break this down. So I just went to the full advanced version. So to start, editing your pivot point. When you hold down the D key, that will free your pivot point and you can move the manipulator somewhere else. If you only hold D though, it will just freely move in space. So I could just, move it all over my screen. Having my pivot point over there is not super useful, but I can do that. Okay. So again, holding D. If you just tap the letter D, it'll lock you into edit pivot mode, and that just, it'll only move the manipulator. So if that happens, just tap D again, or you can switch to another tool and it'll lock it in. Right? So again, you want to hold D to edit the pivot point. Now, if you put the pivot point in a place that you either don't like or you're done with it being in that spot, just as we learned on our first set of notes, back with us is center pivot. Modify menu resets the manipulator. So now, back to the center of the sphere. Go about my business. So how do we put this pivot point onto better locations? 99 times out of 100, folks, you're going to snap your pivot point to another vertex on some other object. So, like I did with the cone, you're going to hold down the D. That will edit the pivot point. Hold down the V key. Then move the pivot point by dragging the circle. And you'll see as I let go of, so I have D held down, you'll see it's a square. When I hold down V, the center of my manipulator will become a circle, indicating that snapping is active. And then I can snap it to some other vertex. And then I can, do whatever, right? Now, the other option, beyond snapping it to a vertex, is to snap to our grid. So this is a free bit of advice for you folks, especially for today's assignment. Working over the origin has many benefits. Maya likes to bring things back to the origin. You'll notice when we get down to groups that will come up again. So if you're working around the origin, which is to say the center of the grid, the X and Z axes become lines of symmetry for your object, right? So if you ever want to snap something to the grid, you can hold D and hold X, and then it'll snap to the grid points, and you can snap it to the vertex. Now, these keyboard modifiers for snap to grid and snap to vertex also work when you're not moving the pivot point. So if I'm just selecting this sphere, I can hold X and snap the sphere's pivot point to the grid, just as I could hold just V and snap the sphere's pivot point to a vertex. But that's because the pivot point is already there. So these modifiers, these snap modifiers, you're not going to always use these with editing pivot, but when you're editing the pivot, you're almost always going to use these. These are useful for when you're moving objects themselves. This is like only useful if you're using these. Just moving the pivot point freely, bad, not good. I would not do it. So, questions on managing your pivots. I understand that this is a lot of random stuff being thrown together. Sorry, it's just one of those things. What do you got?
I could get it to move around, around the center axis thing, or I could get the spheres move around the.
So, let's say you do some of these pivot point moving and rotating and such, and things are not looking the way that you expect them to look. Let's talk about our tool settings for our default tools. So just like we spoke the other day about insert edge loop tools, tool settings here, you can just double click these over here and the tool settings will appear. Each of these have tool settings. You'll notice under each of these you'll see soft select settings. So if you press B, this is where those effects are changed. We're not going to go into changing soft select from there though. So the move tool, you will notice a couple key things. One, as we just discussed, there's a button for editing the pivot here. That is the same as just tapping the D key. You'll see if I tap D, as I said, you'll be permanently changing the manipulator's location. That just highlights this. So the answer to your question is if you double click the tool settings, you will see reset tool and reset pivot. And then it should be back in business. So the reset tool resets these values. Resetting the pivot brings it back to the object's central volume, or volumetric center is the appropriate way to say that phrase. So, let's talk briefly about, I'm not going to talk about edit pivot too much, because it's the same as holding down D, although I did forget to show you. So for my big brain folks out there, for people who are exceptionally intelligent and have gargantuan brains full of info, you can edit the pivot's origin, or orientation rather, and not its position. So this cone has all of these lines, or these edges rather, going to the point at the top of the cone. If I hit this edit pivot, I can turn off editing the pivot's position. And if I click on one of these edges, it will align with that edge. Whoops, did I click the right edge? There we go. Undo that. And then when I do that, it will move along that edge's orientation. So now I'm moving it along whatever edge that I clicked on this cone. So then you could move this along something. When you're done, reset, reset. Back in business. Remember your resets. The other thing that is in here that we haven't talked about yet, by default, as I told you days ago, the arrows on your move tool like to stay oriented with the axes of the world. So red should always be pointing, in general, in the X direction. Z should in general be pointing, or the blue should be pointing in the Z direction. Green in the Y direction. So the only time that may not be true is when you're editing these pivots and such, or if you tell it directly, hey, instead of tracking the world, track the object. So now if I rotate this bad boy around and I'm on my move tool, it will still know this is up for the cone. And then I can move it straight along this path still in the direction of the top of the cone. So that is axis orientation object. It's not anything different than the sake of ease of which direction the arrows move your object. So like this is moving it in relationship to the world. This is moving it in relationship to the object. But you'll notice, no matter what, channel box is tracking its relationship to its original position in the world. No matter how you tell the move manipulator to work, it will keep track of where your object numerically is in the scene. So again, if you use that, give it a shot. Remember, reset buttons. Hit them liberally. They're there to be used. It's not a good email to see. Internet issues. Okay. So, final thing for today, in case it comes up, but this can be quite useful if you're trying to work around an axis of symmetry. Grouping, Command G, is like combining temporarily, right? So if I take, let me make sure my scene is clear. Okay, so let's delete this. So I got a sphere, I got a torus, I got a cone. Okay, so I got these three here. If I grab these three, and I do Command G as in group, you'll notice they now move as one object. Neat. Except they're not one object. They are still three objects. So if I were to then move this over here and scale it up, if I reselect the group by selecting any object in the group, pressing the up arrow on your keyboard to move up the hierarchy, then you'll see I reselected the group that it is still in. Again, my pivot point is not moved for the group, but this object has, as is its size. So I could still rotate this whole group, grab this torus, and I could increase my section radius and my radius, because why not? Again, up arrow, still in the same group, still moving together. Now, another thing that is great about groups though. So say I have this cone over here. If I put this cone, duplicate it, and group it, you'll notice that when I group this, Maya, like I said, wants to work around the origin. Maya put the group's pivot point back at the origin. Now, I can go in here, and this is my x direction. This group, if I scale the x in -1, inverts the location of the object that is in that group, namely that cone. So that is groups. They can be useful in certain aspects because, one, they're temporary. It's not like a combine where you have to separate them after. But also because it allows you to do that thing that I just showed you with symmetry. You can group something inverted along a particular axis to flip it across that line of symmetry. So I show you all of that so that we can do this. So let's go to wand. We're making wands. The wand chooses the wizard. Except for today, you get to choose the wand. So we're not making discretely these wands that are on the screen. You're going to design your own wand. Now the term wand is more of a guideline than an actual rule, in the sense that the term wand can be pretty widely stretched in this regard. So here are some examples from last year's students. So before I start showing you these, I do want to mention about this project. As I was saying earlier, this is our first project. And in fact, the next thing that we start on in this class, when I see you again next Thursday, will be actually our next project as well when we do Maya 5. So we're going to quickly put 2 projects into the grade book. And projects are worth 50% of your grade. Projects are also graded qualitatively, which is to say they're graded on your effort and the skill that you show. So don't rush this. This is not like our other assignments so far where I'm just looking to see that you got it, you get the concept. This is grading you on creativity. This is an art class, don't forget. So let's take a look. So we got this one. It's sort of like a lance. These text strings, he just added, he did like I was showing the other day where you can do the select range, shift double clicking and making these random lines and then making them red. So that's one option. Aiden made a fancy demon scythe. So that's also that's a wand, if you're so inclined to call it one. We got Althea's, which is cracked, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. We got Darren's hella hard to see, but steampunk. Bunch of gears. Ah, crap, hold on. We got Edison's wand. Hey, I mean, it's the same as saying an Avada Kedavra, right? We got, what did Juliana make? Pig wand. That one was a more simplified one. Not all of these were A's, by the way, before anyone gets that crazy idea. Here's one. The wand is this is the wand, bro. That's a wand. We got Justin's wand. Just made a dragon. Don't compare yourself to this one. This is Jason's. He had already taken 2 years of game design before he took animation last year. So I was like, come on, man. You're just like flexing on these kids. They've used Maya for like all of a week. This one's definitely more in the wheelhouse. Let's see. Khalil's. We got a laser sight. We have a bayonet attachment. We have a scope, you know, because that's what you need for your wand. Oh, Nathan also did that for his wand. Opals. Oh, that's a detail shot. There we go. KDA inspired staff. This guy won. So, you want to know how this madman did this, by the way? These are all cylinders that he started as like little tiny stubs and extruded multiple times. So, this guy is my TA this year, and he has me for animation and honors artist portfolio for game design. So, he's about this life. So, you know, your mileage may vary with trying to replicate his work. Vanessa, very lovely, straightforward design. Sydney's was pretty great too. Love this. It's simplified. Again, they don't need to be nuts. Simplified design. Boom. So, those are some examples to help show you the range of ideas that you can follow through. If you're struggling to come up with ideas, folks, a lot of those people just went back to basics. They think about games that they're playing right now, animes they're watching. They made their version of whatever they would have in that world or whatever, etc. So, yep, that's it. So this is one of those things where my guidelines are make a thing. Okay, show quality, show vision, show effort. That's all I ask. Questions, comments, concerns? We're going to have today to work on this. We're going to have Tuesday to work on this, because I won't see you on Monday. And then next Thursday we'll have a new set of notes. I'm hoping that by the following Monday, after that, we'll be able to have everyone submit for our competition for this. So you do have plenty of time to work on this and get this done if you want to put a lot of time and effort into this. Okay? I'm going to stop my